She's too senile to know how much money she has. The words cut through the elegant ballroom like a knife. My own daughter-in-law, laughing about my supposed mental decline with Boston's elite. They didn't know I could hear them. If you're watching this video, subscribe now and comment where you're watching from. Now let's dive into my story. More champagne, Mrs. Richardson? The waiter tilted the bottle toward Victoria's already half-empty glass. My daughter-in-law nodded, her diamond earrings catching the light as she leaned closer to the circle of Boston's elite surrounding her. She's too senile to know how much money she has, Victoria's voice carried across the ballroom, followed by practiced laughter. Yesterday she asked if Reagan was still president. I kept my expression vacant, my eyes unfocused on the elaborate flower centerpiece across the room. My fingers discreetly pressed the small recorder in my pocket. My 35th year in the judicial system had taught me the value of evidence. 6 weeks earlier, I'd fallen down the stairs of my Back Bay home. The accident happened the day after I'd mentioned to James my intention to review the educational foundation documents my late husband Robert and I had established. Now, with a surgically repaired hip and under the influence of medication I was secretly disposing of, I found myself a prisoner in my son's Beacon Hill mansion. A crash from the kitchen turned heads. I used the distraction to adjust the recorder and survey the room. Near the windows stood Dr. Foster, the same doctor who'd insisted I needed family supervision rather than home nursing care. By the bar, I spotted Walter, my brother, whose eyes darted away when they met mine. "Time for your medication, Eleanor dear." Victoria's saccharine voice interrupted my thoughts as she wheeled me away from the party. Her fingers dug into my shoulder, a subtle reminder of who controlled my mobility. From the window of what was now my bedroom, I could see the federal courthouse where I'd presided over complex financial fraud cases for 2 decades. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent my career protecting people from sophisticated predators, only to find myself vulnerable to the ones sharing my name. "You should rest now." Victoria's tone suggested it wasn't a suggestion. "Dr. Foster says too much stimulation isn't good for your condition." I nodded meekly, watching her check the security camera in the corner before leaving. The door clicked shut, followed by the faint sound of a key turning. Locked in. Again. When her footsteps faded, I pulled the small voice recorder from my pocket and placed it beneath my pillow, next to the letter I'd discovered yesterday, correspondence between my son and Judge Hammond, suggesting a partnership in real estate ventures, the same ventures I'd begun investigating before my sudden health concerns forced my retirement 3 years ago. My fingers trembled, but not from age or illness. From rage. They'd orchestrated everything. My retirement when I got too close to their scheme, my husband's altered will during my period of grief, and now this, a calculated confinement designed to transfer my assets before declaring me incompetent. I glanced at the calendar by my bed, calculating. Based on James's phone conversation I'd overheard, they planned to have me declared legally incompetent in 47 days. I closed my eyes, not in defeat, but in concentration. For decades, I'd sentenced white-collar criminals who thought themselves untouchable. I'd unraveled complex financial schemes built on lies and manipulation. Now, I needed to apply that same methodical analysis to my own case. The gavel in my mind struck decisively. The trial had begun, and unlike the defendants who'd stood before me, my family had no idea they were already being judged. During my years on the bench, I'd learned that prisons take many forms. Mine was a multi-million-dollar glass and marble cage. I charted my captivity methodically, cataloging every routine and vulnerability in the house that imprisoned me. The security camera's blind spots, the staff's schedules, the hushed conversations when they thought I was napping. "We need to adjust her medication again," Victoria whispered to the nurse she'd personally hired. She was too alert during the dinner party. My room, once Robert's study, was searched daily. Letters opened, calls monitored, medications administered with military precision, though the doses were mysteriously different from my doctor's original prescription. Victoria had reprogrammed my schedule, ensuring I was drowsy when visitors came, and alert during the nighttime hours when I was alone. I discovered why they wanted me here specifically during one of my midnight explorations. Behind the painting of Boston Harbor in my room, Robert's old office, was the wall safe containing the foundation documents. If they sold my Back Bay home, as James kept suggesting, they'd have unfettered access without suspicion. My body might be weakened, but my mind, The mind that had dissected the most intricate financial frauds in New England was sharpening its focus. "Eleanor, are you awake?" My brother Walter entered without knocking, his forced smile not reaching his eyes. "I brought those books you asked for." I studied him carefully, the slight tremor in his hands, the avoidance of direct eye contact, the new watch that likely cost more than his failing business could afford. "Thank you," I murmured, playing the role they expected. "I forget, did you bring the mystery novels or the gardening books?" "The mysteries," he answered, though I'd never specified any genre. Another test failed. After he left, I heard James on the phone in the hallway, his voice hushed but urgent. "The neurologist is confirmed for the 15th. Yes, we need the competency assessment completed before the coastal development closing. Hammond assured me he'll expedite it, but we need proper documentation." I made a mental calculation. 47 days until they would try to legally strip me of autonomy. 47 days to build my case. That night, I jimmied open the window latch with a letter opener I'd secretly kept. Boston's spring air rushed in, my first taste of freedom in weeks. The 3-story drop made escape impossible with my hip, but I had something else in mind. Across the garden, I could see my teenage granddaughter Abigail's window. The light was still on despite the late hour. Unlike the others, she'd shown me genuine concern, subtle resistance to her parents' narrative about my condition. I took the small mirror from my vanity and angled it to catch the moonlight, directing it toward her window in a pattern. 3 short flashes, 3 long, 3 short. SOS. An old code from the summers when I taught her Morse code at our Cape house. A moment passed, then her light blinked back. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. My first potential ally. The irony wasn't lost on me, the powerful judge now depending on a 16-year-old girl. But in my decades on the bench, I'd learned that justice often comes from unexpected quarters. As I carefully closed the window, I recalled the words I'd said to countless defendants. The truth finds its way to the surface, always. For the first time since my accident, I felt the faintest stirring of hope. "We're concerned about your continued confusion, Eleanor," James explained, standing at the head of the dining table like a prosecutor before a jury. "That's why we've gathered everyone here." I surveyed the faces around me. James in his bespoke suit, Victoria with her practiced sympathetic smile, my brother Walter avoiding my gaze, his wife Diane fidgeting with her napkin, and a stranger introduced as Dr. Monroe. "These episodes are becoming more frequent," James continued, clicking through a PowerPoint presentation titled Mother's Care Plan. The clinical detachment in his voice, as if I weren't sitting right there, made my fingers tighten around my teacup. "Last Tuesday you couldn't recognize your own brother," James said, gesturing to Walter. "You called him Robert. I hadn't made any such mistake." The deliberate lie hung in the air, a test to see if I would challenge it. "And you've been making concerning financial decisions," Victoria added, sliding a folder across the table. "Fortunately, James has been monitoring your accounts." Dr. Monroe nodded gravely. "Memory lapses and financial confusion are often early indicators of cognitive decline, especially after trauma like your fall." I tilted my head slightly, adopting the confused expression they expected. "I don't remember any confusion with my finances." "That's exactly the point, Mother," James said, his voice softening with practiced concern. "You don't remember. I watched documents being passed around, papers I'd never seen bearing signatures I supposedly provided. 3 years as a prosecutor and 20 as a judge had taught me to recognize forgery when I saw it." "I'd like a second opinion," I said mildly. Dr. Monroe smiled condescendingly. "You've already seen 3 specialists, Mrs. Richardson. All agree that complex financial decisions are too stressful for you right now." Another lie. "I'd seen 1 doctor, their doctor, since my fall. Walter," I said softly, turning to my brother. "You've known me longest. Do you think I'm incapable of managing my affairs?" His eyes flickered to James before answering. "Ellie, you haven't been yourself. Sometimes you seem fine, then you get confused." The betrayal stung more than I expected. I nodded slowly, playing my role, while inside I cataloged each deception for the case I was building. Later that night, unable to sleep, I heard voices from the garden. Peering through my window, I saw Walter and James in a heated discussion. "This isn't what I agreed to," Walter hissed. "You said we were protecting her from making rash decisions while recovering, not taking everything. Your financial problems won't solve themselves," James replied coldly. "Unless you found another way to cover your gambling debts?" Walter's shoulders slumped in defeat. "Just promise me she'll be taken care of." "Of course. She'll have the best care money can buy," James answered smoothly. The same tone he'd used with countless clients I'd watched him represent in my courtroom. I backed away from the window, a crucial piece of the puzzle clicking into place. My brother wasn't a mastermind. He was another pawn. James had leveraged Walter's financial troubles to gain an ally, someone who could corroborate claims about my mental state. As I returned to bed, I mentally revised my assessment. James wasn't just after my money. The sophisticated legal mechanisms he was establishing suggested a larger scheme, one possibly connected to the real estate investigation I'd begun before my forced retirement. The stakes were higher than even I had realized, and time was running short. The pain in my hip woke me at 2:17 a.m. Victoria had adjusted my medication again, replacing pain relief with sedatives. I'd been palming the latter and enduring the former. Clarity was worth the discomfort. I eased myself up with practiced silence, reaching for the crutches I'd hidden beneath my bed rather than the wheelchair they preferred me to use. Weeks of nighttime exploration had taught me the guard's rotation and the camera's blind spots. A dim light spilled from James's study. The door stood ajar, unusual for my meticulous son. I approached with the stealth I'd developed since my imprisonment, balancing carefully on my crutches. "We need that competency ruling immediately," Victoria's urgent voice carried through the gap. "The Bank of New England is questioning the foundation transfers." I leaned closer, glimpsing a video call on James's laptop. A man's voice responded, "Judge Richardson built an impeccable reputation over decades. We need more evidence of incapacity." "Hammond promised to expedite the administrative process," James snapped, "but even he can't ignore procedures completely." I recognized the name immediately. Judge Hammond, the same colleague who had questioned my stability when I began investigating irregular approvals for luxury developments 3 years ago. "My name is on documents she shouldn't have signed," James continued. "If she regains control and reviews those papers," the implications struck me like physical blows. James hadn't just manipulated my retirement or current situation. He'd been forging my signature on legal documents, possibly for years. As I shifted weight, my crutch brushed against a decorative vase. The soft scrape froze the conversation instantly. "What was that?" Victoria hissed. I retreated as quickly as my damaged hip allowed, but not fast enough. James found me in the hallway, feigning disorientation. "Mother? What are you doing out of bed?" "Bathroom," I mumbled, playing the confused elder they believed me to be. Victoria appeared behind him, her expression shifting from alarm to calculation. "I'll adjust her evening medication. Clearly, it's wearing off too quickly." After they escorted me back to my room, I waited, counting minutes until I was certain they'd returned to their meeting. Then I retrieved the small notebook I'd hidden in the hollowed-out book spine, another trick from my days prosecuting financial crimes. In it, I'd been documenting every overheard conversation, every suspicious visitor, every discrepancy in my care. James's laptop password had been surprisingly easy to deduce during my previous nocturnal explorations. Victoria 0714, his wife's name and birthday. People rarely deviate from personal patterns, a fact I'd exploited in countless fraud cases. What I'd discovered confirmed my worst suspicions. Emails detailing how James had altered Robert's will while I was heavily medicated after his sudden death. Evidence of the partnership between James and Hammond to force my early retirement when I began investigating their real estate venture. Documentation of systematic transfers from my accounts to offshore entities. I added tonight's revelations to my growing case file, my judicial mind methodically organizing evidence even as my heart splintered at the betrayal's depth. The son I'd raised, the legal mind I'd helped shape, had turned every lesson I'd taught him against me. My hand trembled slightly as I wrote, not from age or illness, but from a cold, clarifying anger. For the first time since my accident, I fully understood the scope of what I was fighting, and what I stood to lose if I failed. "Did you enjoy your tea, Eleanor?" Victoria asked, collecting my empty cup with that patronizing smile I'd grown to despise. "Chamomile is my favorite," I lied. I'd always hated chamomile, a fact my late husband would have known instantly. Victoria's ignorance of such details revealed the superficiality of her care. As she left, I mentally reviewed my situation. 42 days remaining until the competency hearing they thought I didn't know about. My mobility limited by a healing hip fracture, my communications monitored, my medications controlled. Against me stood my son, a brilliant attorney with powerful connections, a daughter-in-law with social influence among Boston's elite, a corrupt federal judge, and a brother financially compromised into compliance. Direct confrontation would be disastrous. They'd already laid groundwork depicting me as confused and unstable. It would be my word against a concerned family and multiple expert witnesses. The solution came from an unexpected case I'd presided over years ago, a corporate whistleblower who survived by reflecting the expected image while gathering evidence. If they wanted a confused old woman, that's exactly what I would give them. On the surface, I began immediately, deliberately misplacing items, appearing absorbed in mindless television while eavesdropping on every conversation and occasionally calling Victoria by my late mother's name. "I'm worried about her," James said to Victoria that evening, not realizing I could hear them from the adjacent room. "She seems to be deteriorating faster than Dr. Foster predicted." "That's actually good news," Victoria replied. "The hearing will go much smoother if her condition is obvious to everyone." I secretly adjusted my medication regimen, hiding pills in a small gap behind the bed frame's decorative molding beyond the camera's view. Decades presiding over financial fraud cases had taught me that even sophisticated schemes have vulnerabilities, often in communication between conspirators. My first opportunity came when I discovered Abigail's resentment toward her controlling parents. During our crossword puzzle lessons, the only interaction Victoria approved, I tested boundaries. "Do your parents check your messages?" I asked casually. The flash of recognition in her eyes told me everything. My granddaughter was as trapped as I was, just in a different cage. "They have parental controls on my phone," she whispered, "but not on my school tablet." That night, after confirming Abigail's willingness to help, "They're treating you like you're already gone, Grandma." I drafted a carefully coded email to my former judicial assistant, Margaret Holloway. "Urgent review of Case 67R required. Documentation compromised. Secure channel needed." For 15 years, Margaret had been my right hand in the courtroom. She would recognize our code for internal judicial corruption investigations, and "documentation compromised" would signal coercion. As Abigail smuggled the tablet back to her room, I turned my attention to Jeff Collins, the driver hired for my medical appointments. I'd observed him carefully, the respectful way he maintained eye contact, unlike the others who looked through me. The subtle assistance he offered without making me feel helpless. There was something familiar about him, something I couldn't quite place. But instincts honed through decades of reading witnesses told me he might become an essential ally in what increasingly felt like the most important case of my career. A case where I was simultaneously the judge, the prosecutor, and the victim, with my freedom and legacy hanging in the balance. "Cognitive decline can manifest inconsistently," Dr. Lawrence Peterson explained to James and Victoria while I sat across from him, deliberately blinking too slowly. "Some days may seem better than others." I recognized Peterson immediately. 5 years ago, I'd presided over a case involving his clinic's insurance fraud. The evidence was substantial, though the case was ultimately dismissed on technical grounds. His recognition flickered in his eyes when James introduced us, quickly masked by professional detachment. Throughout the evaluation, I alternated between sharp lucidity and vague confusion, destabilizing his assessment. When the nurse stepped out momentarily, I abandoned my performance. "Dr. Peterson," I said, my voice dropping to its former judicial authority, "I have 30 seconds. I know about your clinic's billing irregularities in 2020. Those records were sealed, not destroyed. Sign a fabricated capacity declaration, and I'll ensure they're re-examined." He paled. "That's blackmail, Judge Richardson. It's survival, doctor, and an opportunity for redemption." I reverted to confused vacancy as the nurse returned. The next day, Jeff Collins helped me into the car for my physical therapy appointment. As we pulled away from the mansion, he spoke without turning. "You don't remember me, do you, Judge Richardson?" I studied him in the mirror. Should I? 10 years ago, Commonwealth versus Collins, bank fraud case. Recognition dawned. Jeffrey Collins, a junior financial officer pressured by superiors to falsify records. I'd recognized his coercion and ordered rehabilitation instead of prison. "You gave me a second chance," he said quietly, eyes on the road. said you saw the difference between someone forced into wrongdoing and someone embracing it. And now you work for my son? Changed my name slightly. Your son's background check was superficial. He met my eyes in the rearview mirror. I recognized the signs when they hired me. The way they speak about you when you're not present, the medication schedules. And yet you've said nothing. I've been waiting, watching. He handed me a secure phone, keeping his eyes on the road. Your former clerk sends her regards. She's embedded in your son's law firm as a temporary secretary. Your old court contacts arranged it. My third ally materialized later that week, when Judge Martha Williams, a longtime colleague, arrived for a friendly visit. Victoria hovered until Martha mentioned her recent menopause symptoms, sending my squeamish daughter-in-law fleeing with transparent excuses. I received a concerning message, Martha said, once we were alone, her voice low. Margaret forwarded your code. Tell me everything. For 20 minutes, I outlined my situation, the manipulated retirement, the altered medications, the overheard plans for my institutional commitment. Martha listened with the same focused attention she gave capital cases. They've miscalculated spectacularly, she finally said. They see your physical vulnerability and assume cognitive decline. Classic mistake. But effective, I countered. They've isolated me, controlled my medication, monitored my communications, and are systematically building a case for incompetence. Then we build a stronger countercase. Martha squeezed my hand. Eleanor, you taught an entire generation of Boston's legal minds how to dissect financial conspiracies. Time to apply those lessons to your own situation. That evening, during another charity gala at the mansion, I suffered my most public humiliation yet. Victoria, emboldened by champagne, introduced me to Boston's social circle as our dear Eleanor, who sadly can no longer distinguish past from present, suggesting I confused people with soap opera characters. I responded by accidentally spilling champagne on my dress, reinforcing their perception of my decline while the recording device hidden in my brooch, provided by Martha, captured every condescending word. Later, reviewing the recordings alone, I noticed something previously overlooked, the intimate tone Victoria used when mentioning Hammond, suggesting their connection extended beyond professional association. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Something's happening with the coastal development approvals, James snapped into his phone, pacing his study while I pretended to doze in a nearby chair. Someone's asking questions about our licensing process. My strategy had entered its active phase. Through channels established by Margaret, carefully selected information, never enough to trigger formal investigation, just sufficient to raise questions, had reached financial reporters. Simultaneously, Martha had arranged for a prominent investor in coastal development to request an urgent meeting with James about regulatory compliance concerns. Hammond is feeling pressure from the Judicial Ethics Committee, Victoria told James later that night, their hushed argument carrying through the heating vent to my room. We need to finalize the competency ruling before she has any moment of clarity. James hired renowned neuropsychiatrist Dr. Kenneth Goldstein for a definitive evaluation, unaware that Goldstein and I had served together on a medical legal ethics committee years earlier. The doctor, known for his uncompromising integrity, had been specifically suggested by Martha for precisely that quality. Meanwhile, during a legitimate hip assessment, I finally secured truly private time with Margaret. We're ready to proceed, she whispered, while the doctor examined my x-rays in another room. But we need physical proof of the original will documents and bank transfers. Without them, it's your word against his, and he's built a very convincing narrative about your mental health. The challenge seemed insurmountable. How could I, with limited mobility and under constant surveillance, access the safe in my room and smuggle documents out? My granddaughter, I said quietly. She's our key. That evening, while Victoria supervised my bath time with excessive attention to my medication, I noticed her tension. The manufactured evidence of my decline was working too well. They were accelerating their timeline, concerned about leaving loose ends. You must find it exhausting, I said vaguely. Caring for someone so confused. Victoria's smile tightened. Family takes care of family, Eleanor. Yes, I agreed, meeting her eyes directly, momentarily dropping my facade. That's exactly what family should do. Something in my expression made her step back slightly. For a brief moment, doubt flickered across her face. Had she underestimated me? The moment passed as she recovered her composure, attributing my momentary clarity to random fluctuation. But I'd seen it, the first crack in their confidence. Later that night, after another crossword lesson with Abigail, I implemented the next phase. I revealed more truth to my granddaughter. Your parents are attempting to take control of my assets and the educational foundation your grandfather and I planned. I've discovered your father falsified documents during my period of grief. They're using my temporary physical condition to declare me mentally incompetent. Abigail's response showed maturity beyond her 16 years. I've always felt something was wrong in this house. How can I help? I explained my need to access the safe hidden behind the painting in my room, once Robert's office, and digitize crucial documents. Together, we formulated a plan. Abigail would create a distraction to draw Victoria and security away, giving me precious minutes to access the safe. As she left, Abigail paused at the door. Grandma, I've watched you all my life. You were never the kind of person who gave up. That's why they're so afraid of you. Her words strengthened my resolve. The judge who had spent decades ensuring justice for others would not fail to secure it for herself. The Boston weather forecast predicted a severe storm system, high winds and torrential rain. I'd been monitoring it closely, knowing weather extremes often cause power disruptions and security system interference. Backup generators are fueled and ready, I overheard James telling the security staff. Standard protocol during outages, priority to surveillance systems, then climate control. Perfect. When the storm hit with full force, the mansion's lights flickered momentarily before plunging into darkness. Emergency lighting activated, but security systems required approximately 3 minutes to transition to backup power, the critical window I'd anticipated. On cue, Abigail executed her role brilliantly, screaming as she fell down the main staircase. Victoria and the security guard rushed to her aid, exactly as planned. I moved swiftly, months of secretly practicing with my crutches paying off as I reached the painting concealing the safe. My fingers, steady despite everything, entered the combination I'd memorized decades ago when Robert first installed it. Inside lay exactly what I needed. Robert's original will with clear stipulations about the educational foundation, bank statements showing unauthorized transfers, and, most valuable, handwritten letters from Robert detailing his wishes for our estate. Using the small camera Martha had provided, I photographed each crucial document. By the time systems restored and security returned to normal patrol patterns, everything was back in place. No evidence of my intrusion. The storm continued through the night. In the morning, while Boston still dealt with flooding and power outages, Dr. Goldstein arrived for my scheduled evaluation. Federal agents, using the same weather conditions as cover for a discrete operation, positioned themselves strategically nearby. Despite Victoria's protests, Goldstein insisted on conducting the assessment privately. After extensive cognitive testing, he announced firmly, Judge Richardson demonstrates not only full cognitive capacity, but one of the sharpest minds I've encountered professionally. Any suggestion of mental incapacity is, in my professional opinion, completely unfounded. As Victoria attempted to dispute his assessment, federal agents presented themselves with search warrants for both the residence and James's office. The timing was no coincidence. It was the culmination of weeks of meticulous planning, coordinated by Martha Williams and federal prosecutor Donovan, based on evidence I had gradually provided. "What is the meaning of this?" James demanded, arriving home to find agents cataloging his files. "James Richardson," prosecutor Donovan stated formally, "we're investigating allegations of elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and judicial corruption." James's face drained of color as he looked at me, still in my wheelchair, but sitting straighter now. The confusion vanished from my eyes. "Mother," he managed, "this is all a misunderstanding." "Your Honor," I corrected quietly, my judicial tone returning for the first time in months. "You will address me as Your Honor." The storm outside seemed to pause momentarily, as if nature itself was acknowledging that justice, delayed but determined, had finally arrived. 47 days, I said, breaking the shocked silence that had fallen over the living room. That's how long you thought you had until the competency hearing. Instead, you have about 47 minutes to decide how to proceed. James stood frozen between two federal agents. Victoria sat rigidly on the sofa, her perfect posture finally failing her. Walter and Diane had been summoned and looked shell-shocked at the scene unfolding before them. Federal Prosecutor Donovan, a former clerk of mine, outlined the charges being prepared: fraud, forgery, elder abuse, conspiracy, and evidence of judicial corruption extending to Judge Hammond. "This isn't happening," Victoria whispered, her socialite composure crumbling.